After 4 whole game jams, I've finally done it. In a game jam hosted by Jerbob with over 400 entries, I finally got first place. What? I didn't get first place? I got second? What the fuck? Well, I suppose second place is still pretty good. And to be fair, game jams aren't really about ratings, it's about making something new and pushing yourself to make a full game in a short amount of time. But I got second, so I'm still gonna make a video about it. To be completely honest, from start to finish it seemed like everything just kinda went right, which is incredibly abnormal for game jams. Usually they are hectic, problem-filled, and extremely stressful. So without further ado, I present to you my best game jam so far. Now, as I mentioned, this game jam was hosted by Jerbob, and it was actually his first time ever hosting one. Before the theme for this competition even dropped, Jerbob emphasized one thing heavily. The game you made had to be incredibly silly, hence the title, Jerbob's Silly Jam. So before I even knew the theme, I started brainstorming the silliest concepts I could think of, such as pumpkins taking over the world on Halloween to get revenge for being carved, or a guy riding a giant chicken in the sky dodging giant coyotes in airplanes. You know, standard stuff. But without the actual theme, all I could really do was think about ideas without any actual planning. Well, the morning the game jam started eventually came and I found out the theme, which was going to town. Now, immediately I thought of 2 broad ways this theme could be interpreted. Going to town as in going ham or going crazy on something like chowing down food or just doing something a lot, and literally going to a town or some game involving a literal town like protecting a town, navigating a town, and things like that. And almost immediately I settled on the second of the 2 interpretations because I had come up with an idea I really liked, which was this. You play as a chubby kid. Your dad tells you to go out and run some errands for him so you can get some fresh air because you've been too lazy and too fat. Now you have to go into town on your sister's pink bike to all the stores on his checklist, all while navigating obstacles and crazy whatnotness. I thought of making the town insanely colorful as well as, well, silly. I wanted it to be what I imagine a little kid's imagination as, except much more so, which meant tons of different colored buildings, wacky people, weird trees and bushes, green shells zooming through the streets, and things like that. I also knew right from the start that I wanted the game to be 3D, but with lots of 2D sprites, using camera angles and effects like that of Paper Mario to make this work. For the art, I actually ditched my usual go-to, Ace Spray, and used Fire Alpaca. My philosophy for this jam was simple. If you can tell what the drawing is, it's good enough. Since I usually don't have clear-cut mechanics at the start, making the art first really helped me figure out what I want the game to feel like. Plus, with my good enough philosophy, I was able to pump out these sprites of the kid and the dad super quickly. Feeling good about the art and the plan I was making in my head, I fired up Unity. My only goal for the rest of day 1 was to get the kid moving around on his sister's pink bike. I set up a simple road and wrote a script where W and S move you forward and back while A and D are steer left and right without adding extra speed. This system worked perfectly with the mechanics immediately feeling pretty smooth. I had Friday night plans, and since I was off to such a strong start, I decided to end day 1 right there. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling extremely refreshed, grabbed a bite to eat, and got straight to work. I started day 2 off by building the city. I threw down massive colorful cubes and placed them all over the scene to represent buildings. I then created tons of 2D sprites meant to be doors, windows, and signs, and then decorated said building cubes with those sprites. I also made 2D sprites to represent trees and bushes, and I scattered this greenery everywhere, attaching a simple billboard script to each, which just made it so they'd always face the player. Somewhere around here, I decided that having one street wasn't enough, so I created a second street perpendicular to the first. With all those things quickly finished, I began working on creating basic obstacles that moved on fixed paths like cars, people, and green shells, which would damage the player whenever they collided with them. That also meant I had to create a player health script that would handle the player getting damaged as well as player health being 0, triggering a retry panel with a button that would restart the round. With that done, I started tackling the core loop. I set up a game manager that would use scriptable objects with a round data script I created attached. I plan to create one of these round data assets for each round, containing all the information on the round like which locations the player would have to travel to, what enemies would spawn, and how much money the player would start the round with. Here's how the gameplay loop works. At the start of the round, you are given a checklist of shops to hit, with each shop's exclamation point spray activated in the world so the player can easily identify the shops they need to go to. Once you hit all the shop colliders on your dad's checklist, a return home text flashes on screen, and once you get back to the house, you enter an intermission shop stage to buy speed and health upgrades before starting the next round. Oh, and for whatever reason, I decided a sciencey garage rat was the perfect merchant. I had initially planned to add silly weapons and items like an RPG to shoot obstacles that you could also buy, but with the time constraints, I decided to scrap those ideas. Additionally, to keep the pressure on the player, I added a nighttime slider on the top of the screen. If the bar fills up, you lose the round. With the gameplay loop finished and it already being incredibly late, I decided to save the polishing and level design for the final day. I woke up bright and early on day 3. First order of business, a name. I officially titled the game Kids These Days. I whipped up some intro dialogue to set up and introduce the story, but then I realized my basic point A to point B enemies were a bit too simple. Since I had a little extra time on my hands, I decided to add enemies that track the player, like a robber and an aggressive dog, as well as power-ups to the game that could increase the player's health in the round or temporarily increase the player's speed. Setting up tracking enemies was fairly simple. I reused the logic from my basic enemies, having them patrol point to point, but also equipping them with a nav mesh agent and assigning the player to a field in a basic follow script so that when the player is in a predetermined range, they will chase said player until they reach them, dealing significant damage, or until the player escapes their range, upon which they will return to their patrol from point to point. Power-ups were also fairly easy to implement. I just created a basic power-up script that would take in 2 fields, health increase and speed increase. I made lots of different power-up sprites in Fire Alpaca, dragged those sprites into the scene, added the power-up script in a collider set to trigger, and then prefabbed the different sprites. I then created lots of power-up spawn point transforms in the hierarchy, and then changed my round data script to account for how many and what type of power-ups I want to spawn in each round. I decided here I wanted some nice text to show up on screen as well when a power-up is collected, telling the player what buff they were given as well as its quantity. At this point, I noticed the city was looking a little vacant, so I went on a building spree, scaled up the foliage some, and added a custom skybox. And suddenly the game looked a lot more like I envisioned it. Then came time to finally design the individual rounds. I made the first round only have the player go to the store right next door to kind of easily teach them the gameplay loop. The second round I had the dad mention eating stuff on the ground might toughen up the player to introduce the power-ups, and I also made the player go to stores more scattered throughout the town. The rest of the levels progressively increased the difficulty accordingly by both increasing the number of destinations and the number of obstacles, and of course I always make the dad's dialogue align with whatever was going on in the round. With the 6th and final round complete, I edited the game manager to make it so that after the last round and the rounds array was completed, the end of game dialogue would play instead of the usual shop intermission, where the dad basically congratulates the son and the player is presented with a victory screen. I was really happy at this point with the game's state, so I did a lot of playtesting, fixed some bugs like some of the obstacle paths and adding delays to some of the enemy spawns like the cars that would spawn behind the player, and then started work on all the UI transitions and main menu screen. I made some silly little buttons that I think coincided with the goal of the jam, and lastly whipped up some cover art that I thought was pretty funny. With about 45 minutes left to the deadline, I built the game for WebGL, zipped it, and uploaded it to itch.io to test, which is when my heart kinda dropped. The dialogue text and UI were rendering completely off screen in the web build. Time was ticking down and I wasn't sure if I could fix it in time. But then a miracle. Jerbob realized everyone was having upload issues and granted a 1-hour extension. That extra hour was huge. I managed to fix my canvas scaling, adjusted the player settings, built the game again, and submitted the final version. After the dust settled, I spent the week playing and rating about 30 other games. There were tons of great ones. I'll throw a few of my favorites on the screen right now. Throughout the voting period, I was getting a ton of positive feedback, which was really awesome and had me feeling pretty hopeful for the Game Jam's results. Eventually a week had passed and the results dropped. I reluctantly checked the page and second place overall. I was genuinely so pumped. I was dancing around my room and shit. On top of that, I got second in silliness, fourth in fun, and sixth in creativity. It's awesome to see how far I've come from my first ever jam where I basically got last. The first video on my channel talks about that if you want to see it. If you want to play Kids These Days for free, the link is down in the description. Huge shout out to Jerbob for hosting an awesome jam. If you enjoyed this devlog, please drop a like and subscribe. Here's to many more game jams. Thanks so much for watching.